So I believe I am unmuted and on. Hello, everybody. I am Jax Finkel. I'm the Executive Director for Texas NORML, and we are bringing you guys today our first free webinar. So thank you for joining us. Let's kind of chat a little bit about how we got here real quick. As you guys probably know, this was originally going to be an in-person event that we were hosting at the Flamingo Cantina down on 6th Street. It was going to be a big kickoff event for all of these cannabis panels that were going to be hosted by South by Southwest. But of course, with the current public health crisis surrounding the coronavirus, all of these events have been canceled. Well, in order to make sure that we can still provide quality content who are now mostly probably at home, I reached out to all of the speakers, and very graciously, they all agreed to participate and join us and do this webinar. So we have people from Colorado, Dallas area, Austin area, that have all joined us for this webinar. And I want to especially thank our sponsors, Coates Rose PC and Vicente Sederberg, because their sponsorships made this possible, that we could do this transfer and be able to still bring really great content to everybody. There are a few things I want to let the participants know. We are recording this event. We'll have a presentation from each of the speakers, and then at the end, we will have some moderated Q&A. You'll notice that there's a Q&A icon if you're participating in the webinar down at the bottom. You can click on that feature to submit your questions. You can choose your level of anonymity if you want to include your name or not. For those that are not able to join us on the webinar, this is streaming to our YouTube, and it will be available through our YouTube channel later. I do want to say a special thanks to Les Weiler. He is helping us today. He runs the Texas NORML podcast, and so he's making sure that we're able to have this content. So special thanks to him. Let's talk about what to expect. First, we'll start off discussing how cannabis works. We're going to talk about veteran issues surrounding medical cannabis. Then we're going to talk about the federal hemp updates, and then a detailed Texas hemp program update. And lastly, we'll close out with kind of like next steps, takeaways that each of us can do to participate moving forward. So without further ado, let's kick it off with our first presenter. It's going to be Amanda Hughes. She's a cannabis educator with Higher Education Texas. She's a native Dallasite, fifth generation Texan, and a daughter of law enforcement and a mother. She actually had 3 surgeries and had a lot of incorrect diagnoses before she learned about cannabis and started to heal her body with it. And she's very motivated talking about cannabis and the plant-based knowledge. And so what she's going to start out discussing today is, how does cannabis work in our body? So we're going to turn it over to Amanda. She has a presentation, and after that, we'll welcome our next speaker. So Amanda.
Let me get my slideshow up. I'm so excited. Should be available. I am going to. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you can see it and hear it. Okay, good, because I cannot hear anything but myself, which you get to hear for 14 more minutes. So how does cannabis work in your body? Let me get rid of Jack. Sorry. So how does cannabis work in our body? Well, we all have an endocannabinoid system. Anyone who has a spine, essentially. So even your dog has an endocannabinoid system. You use this system to regulate and create homeostasis within your body. And the way that that works is you have 11 other systems in your body: your skeletal system, your respiratory system, your muscular system, circulatory, digestive, and on and on. And what happens is your endocannabinoid system sort of ties all of those together. Here is your endocannabinoid system. Oops. Let's go back. Sorry. There's your endocannabinoid system sort of represented in the circle, with each dot corresponding to your 11 systems. So what the endocannabinoid system does is it helps to regulate homeostasis within these symptoms. Homeostasis is just balance. So helps you get more of what you need and less of what you don't, essentially. And the way that it does this is your endocannabinoid system has 3 parts. So it has endocannabinoids, which is what your body produces naturally in a perfect environment, such as you've probably heard of anandamide, which is like your joy endocannabinoid, and 2-EG is another one you've probably heard of. So these endocannabinoids work to with receptors, which is another part of the endocannabinoid system. The receptors are what these endocannabinoids can bond with and or influence. So also a third part to that system is the enzymes. The enzymes are what help break down those endocannabinoids. So endogenous, endo meaning inside. So most of us are familiar also with phytocannabinoids. So phyto would be an exocannabinoid or an external cannabinoid. Phytocannabinoids are plant-based chemical compounds found in plants, such as cannabis, that attach to or affect the receptors, causing different reactions and creating hopefully balance and homeostasis within the body. These exocannabinoids, they work similarly to the endocannabinoids to supplement the system. So they supplement the system almost in an exact way that the phyto supplements almost in an exact way that the endocannabinoids do. So where do we find those? We find those endocannabinoids, we find those in the trichomes, which we know trichomes, right? Right here, and much closer up, right over here. Trichomes are the little crystallized mushroom-shaped sort of balls that come on the flower of the female cannabis plant. Trichomes contain phytocannabinoids, and they also contain terpenes, which I'll touch on that in just a minute. They're only found in the female plant, primarily in the flower, and so those are also actually found in other plants as well, but primarily the most cannabinoids are found in cannabis. So your body is producing these endocannabinoids, and they're delivering them to your endocannabinoid system. And that is in a perfect world and perfect health, under perfect circumstances, our endocannabinoid system would feed us well. Raise your hand if you're in perfect health and it's a perfect world. So when it's not and you need supplements, phytocannabinoids can enter your body and take priority in your endogenous cannabinoid system. They can take that priority and sort of assume or assist the role that your endocannabinoids would be performing if everything was perfect, if you had ideal health conditions. So they come in and they sort of take over and do the job that the endocannabinoid system would be doing if things were optimum. So where do we find those receptors, and how does the endocannabinoid system work with these other parts of our body? Well, the 2 most primary receptors that we have learned about are the CB1 and the CB2. There are a whole group of other ones. But the CB1 receptors are found primarily in your brain and your central nervous system. And your CB2 receptors are found primarily in your peripheral nervous system and in your gut and in your immune cells. So that's kind of like everything, isn't it? That covers so much. The endocannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2, there is crossover, and you will find different parts of your body that have both or have neither and have other endocannabinoids. So within your brain, you have both, right? You have CB1 and you have CB2, which is why certain cannabinoids work on your brain. For one thing, like we know THC is typically very effective for pain, but we know that CBD is often essential in seizure control, and CBD primarily affects the CB2 receptor. So depending on what receptor it is and what cannabinoid it is, there's different effects you can achieve. Of course, we want and need more research to confirm and discover more, but so far that's where we are. I do want to add terpenes, because terpenes are what give cannabis its smell, the scent, the aroma. It's why when you notice you have one plant or one flower and it varies, the way it smells varies. It can vary from grower to grower or from season to season within the same grower, and obviously within certain genetics. So different cultivars will have different different terpene levels. So why is that important? Why does that matter? So one reason that it matters is because terpenes are lipophilic, meaning they're fat bound. They are able to cross the blood-brain barrier, and they can cross the blood-brain barrier essentially better and easier than cannabinoids because they're smaller. So if you think of when you smell something, or when there's an aroma in from a natural plant or fruit or vegetable, the way that it smells, those are terpenes that are being produced. And often you can get an effect just by smelling them. So they're so small that they have an ability to penetrate your olfactory senses before they've even sort of registered in your brain. Like how often have you said you smell something and it reminds you of something else, and you know it reminds you of something else, but it may take you a while to figure out what that is. So it's accessed that part of your brain so quickly that it's sort of bypassed to that reasoning, that ability to remember what it is that smell reminds you of. So, but why does that matter? Why does that matter with cannabis? So the reason that it matters with cannabis is because these terpenes are responsible for sort of the nuance effect, meaning if we know THC does this and we know CBD does this, well, what if I have two different plants with exact equal amounts of cannabinoid ratios? Cannabinoids are your THC and your CBD. If they have equal amounts of all cannabinoids, but they produce different effects, and of course they have a different sense, well, why is that? That's the terpenes. It's the terpenes. So the terpenes are able to give you sort of a nuanced effect of how your endocannabinoid system is affected by cannabis. They modulate, the terpenes sort of modulate the effect and the uptake of endocannabinoids, and just have fantastic therapeutic properties all on their own. They are extremely abundant. They make up most of the compounds in our plant world. I find that discussing terpenes is often overlooked when talking about the endocannabinoid system. And I think a big reason is because how are we going to effectively study 20,000 different known terpenes? And what happens if we combine those together? So I think of it like I bake, and if you bake and you know a recipe has a little bit of sugar and a little bit of salt, well, if you invert the ratio of either of those, it's changed your recipe entirely. So within terpenes, if I have a little bit of limonene and a little bit of linalool, then changing the ratios of those will change the effect of the plant, the cannabinoids and the rest of the flavonoids and the other properties in the plant. It'll change the way that it affects you just by those little subtle terpene variety. So I'm going to go back to this and just talk for a second about endocannabinoid deficiency, and just sort of suggest to you to start sort of listening for that. I know that we have Dr. Ethan Rousseau is speaking tomorrow night at the Southwest Southwest event that's now going to be, I think, streamed. I'm sure Jeff will add on to how to access that. But he has talked a lot about endocannabinoid system and worked with some studies on that. So the endocannabinoid system deficiency, the deficiency. So think of it like if your body is expressing things to you such as illnesses, and my body is expressing illnesses and symptoms of illness, each of us could be having different symptoms like migraines or IBS or gut issues or other endocrine issues or lymphatic or MS or Parkinson's or on and on and on and on, right? So however your body is showing that illness, that weakness, I want to suggest that the source of that could often come down to an endocannabinoid deficiency. And yes, once you've reached the point of illness, now it's like, a fast moving train. But if we can sort of look into more research, there's been a ton of research on endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome with migraines and IBS and fibromyalgia and sort of those illnesses that are hard to test for, like there's no blood test to determine if you have fibromyalgia or have a migraine. So it's difficult to measure that. But a lot of those similar illnesses have been studied for endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome and have been effectively treated by supplementing with phytocannabinoids. So I just want to suggest and have everyone sort of start listening, and maybe I'm going to put in a question to Dr. Rousseau tomorrow, but sort of start wondering and paying attention to and getting in touch with more balance within your body and sort of the homeostasis that you need to create instead of this culture of treating symptomatically. I don't want you to just get rid of your symptoms. I want you to get rid of the cause of your illness. And if endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome is the cause, it could be triggering so many illnesses. I mean, we see all these 11 systems that it could be affecting. And I just think that that's really important to sort of say, well, why does it matter? Why is an endocannabinoid system? Why do we have it? Why does it matter? Why do I need to supplement it? I think that that's a real important point to make. I think that I just hit my time just perfectly. So if anybody has any questions, we're going to do Q&A at the end, and I'm happy to answer those.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. I appreciate you sharing all of those really great slides. I really enjoyed that. And I actually pulled up our YouTube channel. We've got over a dozen people watching us on YouTube, and we've got about 3 dozen watching us here on the webinar. So that's really awesome to see so many people participating. Next, we are going to be welcoming Robert Head. Robert Head is a U.S. veteran. He served in the infantry from 2003 to 2007. He has 29 months of combat experience and leadership. After the Army, Robert set his eyes on A&M, and he graduated from there in 2010. And he actually went into having a civilian career in aviation. He had a bout with pills and alcohol that he kind of talks about, and that's how he found that cannabis saved his life. Since then, he started a medical cannabis farm up in Maine called Blue Cord Farms, and he works to educate the community on cannabis and why veterans to it here. And he's joined us today representing Operation Trapped. And Robert's going to be discussing veterans and medical cannabis in Texas. So we're going to turn it over to Robert now, and I will mute myself. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Jax. How you guys doing? So a little bit about me and my past. Once I got out of the Army, got involved with the aviation industry, and I just went to work like normally people will do. And when during this time, I found that I was drinking more and I was taking more pills, and that pretty soon led to a blow up, and I had to find an alternative medicine. And I found cannabis, and it helped really, relieve me from all the pills and from the drinking, and put me on a good path towards a healthy lifestyle, a better lifestyle for my family and my friends. But now I was a criminal for doing that. And so I work with these guys from Texas Veterans for Medical Marijuana, David Bass, and all of them. They have developed, or they created what is called Operation Trapped. And what Operation Trapped is that they take a pill bottle, an empty pill bottle, stick a green army man in it, and it signifies the soldiers that are trapped, that are all the veterans here in Texas that are trapped, using nothing but the pills that are given to them when they have a plant that can be accessible, that pretty much relinquishes all the pills that they're using, and it gives them a much better lifestyle and a much better, a healthier lifestyle and a better relationship with their kids and their family. But they can't attain that unless they use the pills, and they can't attain it with the pills because the pills are making their lives much worse. So we kind of came up with this idea of Operation Trapped as a documentary when I was approached by filmmakers in 2019. That's after the legislative session where the PTSD was not going to be put into the final teacup bill. We had some guys that were really upset about that. Obviously, all of us were really, really upset about it. And the filmmakers approached me from the Hustle company called Tyler Sloan and Bo Sexton, and they wanted me to help put this together and develop this documentary. And so we went around and we kind of figured out how we wanted to tell the story. And what we wanted to do was tell the stories of the veterans, how cannabis is really helping their lives, but the complexity that is Texas politics that's keeping them from obtaining a legal way of being healthy. And so we developed what we called Operation Trap. So Les, if you can hear me. If you want to go ahead and play that, go ahead. I don't know if I'm supposed to sit here and be quiet.
Hi, my name is Tyler Sloan. I'm the film director for the documentary film Operation Trap. Operation Trap is a film about Texas veterans that have to choose between medicine that heals them and medicine that kills them. This film is special to me as a filmmaker because it helps people like Robert Head sitting next to me, a 5-year veteran that served in Iraq and Iran.
Operation Trap's mission is to bring awareness of the positive impact that medical cannabis is having on the Texas community of veterans. Our Texas veterans sacrifice a lot, and we owe it to them a platform for their voice to be heard, and we believe that this documentary will give them that.
We're at the stages in the film now where we've been all over Texas doing interviews with political leaders, professors, medical marijuana advocates, and scores of veterans, and they've all had the same thing to say about this issue. It's time for a change.
With your contribution to Operation Trap, we'll be able to get the word out outside of our NORML cannabis community. A lot of times the events that we throw are within people who already agree with cannabis. But this is about getting out there to the veterans and the people who live with veterans, who know veterans, and have some kind of relationship with veterans. It's to all the Texans out there. This is what we want to be able to accomplish. By doing this, with your contribution, we'll be able to help with marketing, distribution, and events all over the state of Texas.
With your help, we can take this film and get it where it needs to be and make the difference that needs to happen. Please join us in this fight and give us a follow on all of our social media platforms and check out the list below on ways that you can help us with this film. Thank you for your time, and let's continue to fight.
So I hope, oh, there she is. We're good to go. I am still muted. No, I'm not. I'm not muted. So if you can still see me, yeah, I'm on. So that was a kind of a, you'll see a little bit what we're trying to do with this documentary. And what we'd like to be able to show it is once it'll be out in August of 2020, and it's going to kind of shown all the way through 2021. We'll release it at a few theaters. We're going to want to show it at private viewings at VFW and other events, but we also want to get it out in front of the universities, maybe some medical universities, Texas A&M School of Law, or maybe UT School of Law, talking about the TWU, the nursing area. Let's talk about medical marijuana up there. And what we wind up doing is we get people who are not really concerned about marijuana, but are concerned about the health or the welfare of the veterans. And so they take a look at this aspect of it. They may not be necessarily concerned with cannabis, but they are concerned with the veterans, and they may be concerned with their overall healthcare. So if we can get this proposal in front of them by showing them, hey, here's an argument you may want to take a look at. What we're doing is we're pushing voters into the legalization community where they understand it. They may not want to partake in it, and it's not for them to partake if it's not for them to partake. But they do understand why it's there, and they agree that this issue should be part of our life so that we can help as many veterans as possible. Because one of the problems that we've been seeing as we did this whole show was that our biggest roadblock is kind of ourselves in a sense. We keep speaking out and doing a lot of events where we try to spread as much awareness as possible, but it's very hard to get it outside of that cannabis community and cannabis bubble. And so we're hoping that this film will kind of inspire that idea to be able to say, hey, this is an educational film that has a lot of prominent people in Texas that are in it that are talking about this issue. And I think we need to look at it from a more educational perspective. And hopefully we can start talking with nurses and medical staff, and we can start talking to future politicians and people who want to work in the political environment, and also start talking to more people who are in the legal environment about all these repercussions that were happening. Because I was talking to Dr. Sue Sisley just the other day, and she was telling me that, you know, marijuana if you take just the Schedule I list, even marijuana is the one drug that is more abused more than anybody else in regards to regulations. you can almost do nothing with it if you're an entity like a university that wants to study it, or if you're a company that would want to use it, you would not even be able to touch it. But those other drugs on Schedule 1, you have far easier access to research and work with. And so that really says something about why people were so scared for so long about this drug. And hopefully that a documentary like this kind of starts to unravel the complexities to it. I'm not sure about how much time I have, so Jax, go ahead and ping me if I'm starting to get too far. Perfect. So what we'd like to be able to also see is that we're going to try to do other documentary series maybe about these issues in other states too. But there's a lot of, like, I notice there's so much on every single state that's very different. So Texas has its own set of problems, but Colorado also has a set of problems, although Texans wish we had Colorado problems. But if you go to Kentucky, they got their problems, and they're not the same thing as Texas. Or Alabama has problems too, but it's not the same thing as Texas. So every veteran group and every Texas NORML group or a NORML group or any type of marijuana nonprofit group that's coming together to push legalization has their own set of fights on their hand. It's all complex. So it's really interesting when we started doing this documentary, when we started diving into the complexity of the problem. It's everybody saying, well, it's not me, it's them. Well, it's not me, it's them. And you having to follow the finger pointing until you get to maybe the source. And the source of it really is that we want to change these laws, and we want to move ourselves forward to a legalization, a place maybe like Texas, or excuse me, like Oklahoma, or maybe like Arizona. Then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to educate the people. We're going to have to ask for it. We're going to have to push the politicians to say, hey, your position on this really matters if I'm going to give you my vote or not. And we need to get there as a state.
Awesome. Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you bringing the trailer. I know that you also have a slightly longer trailer that's available as well. I want to say it's about like 4 minutes. It's got a little bit more about Robert's personal story in that one. So maybe we can share that link as well, get some more content out there for everybody. I want to take the opportunity real quick to also remind our participants that this is being recorded and that there is a Q&A feature. If you look at the bottom, you'll see the Q&A, little 2 chat bubbles. If you want to post any questions there as we go, you can, and we'll get to those at the end. We still have some hemp updates to talk about, which is really exciting. So next up, I get to welcome Shawn Hauser. She's actually an Austin native and currently is partner and chair of Hemp and Cannabinoids Department at Vicente Sederberg. Shawn helps marijuana and hemp businesses navigate the intersection between state and federal laws. As you guys know, it's very complicated terrain to navigate there. She is been named one of Denver's top lawyers for, I want to say, 5 years in a row. So that's pretty excellent. And I'm super happy to say that VS will be launching an Austin area office. So that's exciting. And also happy 10th anniversary to Vicente Sederberg. So Shawn is going to discuss a federal update with us and what these federal regulations mean for states. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the lovely Shawn Hauser.
Great, thank you, Jax. And can everyone hear me okay? Okay, cool. Thanks so much for putting this together, and really grateful to be able to participate and still share this information and progress with folks virtually, and feels great to be connected with the Texas community. I'm going to share my screen here, which is a PowerPoint. So hold on one second. Okay. Oops. So hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint. So I wanted to start with a federal update. 2020 is really a remarkable year for cannabis reform. We have 11 states in Washington, D.C. with full legalization, 33 states with medical laws, 16 states with laws recognizing cannabinoids, which means states with low THC laws like Texas. And despite many legal, regulatory, and political obstacles, the market really continues to expand rapidly, and an overwhelming majority of Americans support cannabis reform. These maps really show, illustrate the incredible progress. This first map is the states with full adult use, noting that Vermont and DC don't allow actual sales. 15 additional states in the US Virgin Islands have removed jail time for possession of small amounts. We're seeing a lot of states follow that lead, and we'll likely continue to see that type of decriminalization reform in the years to come. 33 states, DC, and 4 territories have comprehensive medical marijuana laws, meaning they have enough qualifying conditions and don't include limitations so that their programs are truly operable. And then here's the map with the 15 states with CBD and no or low THC. And finally, the map with all the different types of reform. So you'll see that, I think we've really hit the tipping point, and that's highlighted by the fact that there are a host of other states looking at legalization initiatives in 2020. The states here are both looking at legislative or constitutional initiatives to pass adult use marijuana and medical marijuana laws. And if anyone's interested in specific state initiatives, we're happy to provide resources. Marijuana Policy Project, NORML, and others have great resources as well. But we've just seen an unprecedented movement this year, which is common in an election year. And I think, unfortunately, Missouri and Ohio, I believe, announced today they were suspending campaigns, which we might see, there's some limitations around the coronavirus as far as ability to move things forward. But regardless, I think this is still quite significant as far as potential progress in 2020 with, a lot of these states pulling significant support. The other important protection that remains in federal law, even though marijuana remains federally illegal, is, we continue to have this appropriations rider, which prohibits the federal government from using funds to enforce federal law against marijuana businesses who operate in state legal regimes. This has been a protection since 2015 and has continued this year in the 2020 budget. It only protects medical marijuana businesses. The protections do not extend to adult use businesses. But in practice, despite the rescission of many Obama era enforcement policies like the Cole memo, we've seen federal enforcement, mostly honor those principles where they're not interfering with state regulatory regimes, as long as certain enforcement priorities aren't triggered and businesses are complying with state law. The other really remarkable progress that illustrates how much progress we've had on the federal level is the amount of federal banking legislation that we've seen, and the support in Congress. It's, the reality is Congress is now discussing how, not whether, we're going to legalize cannabis. And that's certainly a shift from days before, when it was hard to even bring the word marijuana or cannabis into the federal discussion. And we've turned a tide on how much the legislators and policymakers are educated on this issue. And I wanted to highlight a few of the major federal bills. Many of you might have heard about the Safe Banking Act. It is probably the most promising federal bill, although, you know, most of or all of them unfortunately have a low likelihood of success. This one really seeks to ensure that cannabis businesses are treated like other businesses and have access to banking, and are able to, you know, get loans and other traditional services that have really hindered them in having an operable and legitimate business. The law would prohibit federal banking regulators from taking any action to enforce federal law against banks that are providing services to state legal businesses, as well as ancillary businesses, and it includes express protection for hemp businesses. And it prohibits criminal, civil, or administrative forfeiture, and would really give a safe harbor to banks who, you know, are servicing the business, and eliminate, you know, their fear of federal enforcement given marijuana legality. Banks still would have, you know, due diligence and other requirements to make sure they're working with lawful businesses. But in all, you know, I think this is quite a positive bill. What it doesn't do is address the legality of marijuana in the Controlled Substances Act. So it does nothing to legalize or decriminalize marijuana. It simply addresses the banking issue. It was a pretty historic piece of legislation. It was the first standalone piece of cannabis legislation to reach a congressional floor vote. And it's in the Senate. It's likely not going to get through the Senate committees, but it's made incredible progress so far, and there's still potential that it keeps moving. Here's its timeline. Also notable was that multiple trade groups outside the cannabis industry, banking industry, and others sent letters of support to Committee Chairman Crapo, urging him to move the bill forward. And the kind of support we have from industries outside of the cannabis industry is notable, and something that we haven't seen significantly in the past as far as federal cannabis legislative efforts. The MORE Act. So the MORE Act is really a remarkable piece of cannabis reform legislation. In addition to removing marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act, effectively legalizing it and decriminalizing at the federal level, it would require the federal government to take many steps to, you know, address social justice and social equity and the harms of the drug war. So it would require the federal government to review and potentially expunge violent cannabis offense convictions. It would then establish a 5% federal excise tax on cannabis products to fund the Opportunity Trust Fund, which would assist communities historically impacted by the war on drugs, would create small business programs and expedited licensing, and would do other things to promote restorative justice. It you know, does include a tax, but it also, by removing cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act, would address the 280E taxation issue and the banking issue, which would be a significant financial relief for cannabis businesses. And the 5% excise tax was considered in weighing those things, and with, you know, ensuring that we have some funds to address social justice. This was a bill that was introduced in last July by Senator Harris and Jerry Nadler. It has significant sponsorship, 73 co-sponsors in the House, a few in the Senate. Because it has a tax and and touches so many different issues, it will need to go to a lot of different committees. So it's likely it gets you know, stuck in committees, and it's going to be difficult for it to get through the Senate. But again, it's a really significant bill as far as how far we've come. It's the first bill proposing to end federal marijuana prohibition to be approved in a congressional forum. It sparked some really intelligent and comprehensive discussions on what legalization needs to look like, and the importance of addressing people that were harmed by the drug war and the various ways to do that. So the conversation itself and the education it's provided to legislatures, I think has been incredibly valuable and undoubtedly a step forward. The States Act is the last major piece of kind of federal reform legislation. This law would exempt cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act only in states that have implemented regulatory regimes as well as tribal authorities, and gives regulatory oversight of cannabis to those jurisdictions. It also too resolves banking and tax issues by clarifying that state legal cannabis transactions won't be the subject, or so it won't be the proceeds of an unlawful transaction. This bill suffers a bit from a lack of bipartisan support. There's been, concern that it doesn't have enough in it to address the harms of the drug war and the social justice issues that the MORE Act does. It was introduced in spring 2019, and there's been no action in the Senate yet. So this bill has a slim to low likelihood of success, but again, was progress that it got so far with so much for support, and the conversations around it have been important. Recent bills that have come up this spring, I think are incredibly important, especially for Texans and where there's a lot of veterans, and for the veteran and medical community in general. The Veterans Equal Access Act would allow doctors at the VA to recommend medical marijuana to patients in states where it's legal. This bill was approved by Veterans Affairs in March, and has 19 co-sponsors in the House. It's formally opposed by VA officials, but it has received support by veterans groups that understand cannabis policy reform. And I think it's a great vehicle where right now support is really needed to contact your representatives and industry organizations and push this forward. Second, there's the VA Medical Cannabis Research Act. This is something they've been trying to push forward for a few years now and keeps getting stalled, but looks like it has good potential to move forward this year. This would require the VA to conduct clinical trials on the potential benefits of cannabis in treatment of conditions that commonly affect veterans, and would codify a VA directive protecting veterans from being denied benefits due to their participation in a legitimate cannabis program. It was recently, a few weeks ago, approved by the Veterans Affairs Committee, has 105 bipartisan co-sponsors, and being a research bill, I think has a lot of support and some good potential. And again, it's opposed by VA officials, but has received broad support by veterans groups and even some of the prohibitionist groups. Shifting a little bit from marijuana, cannabis, and to hemp and CBD, as many of you know, the federal farm bill legalized hemp and removed it from the Controlled Substances Act. Texas actually just started accepting its applications for its hemp program this week, which was super exciting. And to that effect, the FDA has been openly evaluating how it is going to regulate CBD in food and dietary supplements. And it's the FDA's current position, and the regulatory uncertainty around it continues to be a significant challenge for the hemp industry. And in addition, the way the federal government addresses the regulation of CBD and hemp undoubtedly sets the table for what it's going to do for marijuana as a whole. So FDA's process and the science they're looking at to make their decision, I think, is incredibly important. The FDA's current position is that CBD can't be included as a food ingredient or a dietary supplement ingredient because of provisions in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that prohibit substances that have been studied or approved as new drugs from also being sold as food and dietary supplements. FDA has the authority to make an exception to that rule, and right now they're currently evaluating whether that's appropriate to do for CBD or other hemp-derived cannabinoids and how they're going to do so. Last year they had a public hearing soliciting comments from various experts. They opened a public comment period and reviewed over 4,000 comments regarding the safety and efficacy of CBD. They recently, on March 5th, provided in their report to Congress that they still need more information to make an informed decision as to how they're going to regulate CBD. And they're going to be reopening that public comment period. They've outlined where they're soliciting specific information. They also outlined their additional initiatives to get good research, to collaborate with their state regulatory partners, to evaluate the marketplace, and to expand research grants for CBD and opportunities to get the information they need as far as the safety and science of cannabinoids. The 2020 spending bill directed FDA to take this action and mandates them to give reports to Congress as to their progress. This March 5th report was their first progress report, and the next report, which will be this summer, will be results of their sampling study of the marketplace to determine the extent to which products are mislabeled and adulterated. FDA has indicated it may come out with some sort of risk-based enforcement policy in the meantime. Right now, they continue to highlight the factors in which they prioritize enforcement, which are those factors that specifically relate to public health and safety, such as making drug claims, particularly with life-threatening conditions, such as products that have harmful contaminants like heavy metals and high levels of THC. And I think we can expect to hear more from them this summer, although I think, FDA's progress and ability to focus resources on this issue may be significantly changed, with the coronavirus and the needed resources there. There's also a lot of pressure by Congress and congressional efforts to address this issue through Congress and not wait for the FDA. HR 5587, introduced in January 2020 by Representative Colin Peterson, would essentially amend the FDCA to change the definition of dietary supplement and food products to allow CBD, assuming it meets the safety standards and other standards of other ingredients. Jack's telling me, I think I may be running out of time. Okay. And yeah, I guess, I wanted to end with sort of, what does this all mean? What does this all mean for the states? I think, like I said at the beginning, it means, we've reached the tipping point with cannabis reform, and most states are, working to adopt some reform and allowance for a cannabis program. And I think we can expect that whatever federal legislation ultimately looks like, that state programs are going to be critically important, and those that are, well structured and include, comprehensive stakeholder processes are, I think, poised to be successful. And I think the other takeaways are that it's more important than ever to be involved in reform, to be working with your state and federal representatives to support things like safe banking, to try and move things like the Peterson bill forward, and to continue to get sponsorship on these federal bills, and to continue to have responsible and good state programs, good regulatory regimes on the state level, can serve as a model for what we're going to do federally, can serve as a model for other states. And I think we really need to work together and take the lessons learned from these state experiments and take the opportunity to shape the best industry we can. And I think, given the number of states that have initiatives in 2020, and given the unique challenges that these campaigns are now going to face with the coronavirus and limited resources and required social distancing, these campaigns need support. Patients need access to medical cannabis. They need it before, they especially need it now. So I encourage everyone to get involved in their state and spread the word. And please feel free to reach out to us at VS or to NORML if we can help provide resources. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shawn. I really appreciate that. And I think that that's a good reality check at the end. We made this virtual out of an abundance of caution and respect for the elderly and the patients that participate in this movement. And I think that it's really important that we think about, how is this going to interrupt their stream of access to medicine, both in states that have robust medical programs, but also in states like Texas that have a much more limited program and leave a lot of the patients kind of having to use the black market, unfortunately. So thank you for making sure that we are being thoughtful about that as we take into account this very unusual circumstance that we find ourselves in. Thank you very much, Shawn. And next, we are going to introduce Lisa Pittman. Lisa has been practicing law for well over 20 years, I believe. She is a Texas native and currently is in Austin. She's licensed in both Colorado and in Texas, and she just recently came on as of counsel in the cannabis business law practice at Coates and Rose PC. So if you have been following the hemp program, Lisa has been working very intricately with legislators and the Texas Department of Agriculture to get the program up and running. She actually serves as the member of the Texas Hemp Advisory Council. So what she's going to do today is give us an update on where do we stand right now regarding licensing and regulations and all the things that are going on with hemp. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to the First Lady of Cannabis Law, Miss Lisa Pittman.
Hi, thanks, Jax. And I want to thank Texas NORML organizers for being the only organization standing to put on quality cannabis content during South by Southwest this week, and for making a real effort to get this information out there despite the conditions that we're under. So I've got a PowerPoint to share with you. That's fine. I can forward this way. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm not much of a PowerPoint wizard, but I thought that given the circumstances that the visuals might be helpful. So here are all of the federal and state agencies involved in regulating hemp. Although the the 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp as a federally legal agricultural commodity, it's still treated like mini marijuana in a way that I refer to it, with all of the agencies that are implicated, including the DEA at the federal level for disposal and certifying testing labs, and then as to the marketing of hemp and the sale of hemp, the FDA and the FTC has been brought in for advertising claims. The USDA, of course, controls the agricultural component of growing hemp, and its counterpart in Texas is the Texas Department of Agriculture. The FDA's counterpart is the State Department of Health and State Health Services, referred to as DSHS. And the Department of Public Safety is the law enforcement arm of Texas, which ironically controls the compassionate use program. They are not required to specifically promulgate any rules under the Texas Hemp program, but at different points in the application process, the DPS is notified of your progress as far as your licensing and as to whether your crop is tested hot. So Shawn has already touched on a lot of this, but the 2018 Farm Bill retained FDA authority over CBD, and she had explained how it's considered a drug and therefore why it cannot be marketed as a dietary supplement. So if you're someone out there making labels, or you have a website or social media that are saying certain things about your products, you've got to be very careful in the wordsmithing of that. The FDA also stated that hemp CBD cannot be infused into foods or beverages placed in interstate commerce. So it's a little bit different situation state by state. Some state health departments have come out very strongly, like Massachusetts, New York, saying you cannot infuse foods or beverage products. But in Texas, for example, it's okay. It's not, hemp CBD is considered a food adulterant. So those are business decisions you have to make as a company, and those are the kind of work that I do, is seeing the political and legal temperature for hemp CBD products state to state. As Shawn has already gone over, there's a great deal of public comment already taken, and the latest action by the FDA was they put out a status report in which they explained that they're still collecting information and they are looking for a way to regulate hemp as a dietary supplement, as it should be, instead of as a drug, which thank goodness they're not taking that. And how we all got here with these hemp CBD products started with the 2014 Farm Bill, which allowed states to grow hemp in two limited conditions. If they had a university pilot research program contract with a research university, or if a state decided to have an industrial hemp program. And the four main states that took advantage of that were Montana, Colorado, Kentucky, and Oregon. Under the 2014 Farm Bill, though, CBD was still considered marijuana in the eyes of the federal government. So these products were not supposed to leave state lines, and it was really complicated, the state and federal tensions in the law before the 2018 Farm Bill. But I bring this up because states' ability to run their own individual hemp programs without regard to the 2018 Farm Bill rules, that still continues through Halloween of this year because of some problems we're going to talk about with the rules that the USDA came out with. So the legal significance of the 2018 Farm Bill was that it removed hemp from the definition of marijuana, which is a Schedule I controlled substance under the U.S. Controlled Substances Act. And each state has its own Controlled Substances Act as well. So a lot of the states have followed suit. The 2018 Farm Bill required the USDA to come up with national regulations to govern hemp programs. And I have listed on this slide some of the significant dates in that process. They took public hearing last year about this time. On Halloween, they released what's called the interim final rule, which received over 4,600 public comments. So much so that they may reopen the public comment period after the first year's harvest. And because of some problems in the rules, which I'm going to go over, the USDA is relenting on a few of the points. The USDA required states with plans as for their THC testing limit, how they were going to perform licensing and inspection, what their reporting procedures were going to be, and what their plans for disposal of hot crops, which is a crop over 0.3% THC. And so these plans that the state had to submit to the USDA included not only their rules, but you had to check the box as to how you were going to comply with each of the provisions of the USDA rule. Some other points for the 2018 Farm Bill was that it provided for federally backed crop insurance. That's not available because you have to have been growing hemp for at least a year, so that insurance companies have some historical data to go on to assess what premiums and whether or not to issue insurance at all. So maybe next year Texas will be included in that. You can still get hemp insurance. It's just not federally backed crop insurance. It put in place a felony ban for anyone who's a key participant, which is somebody with a voting right or controlling interest in a company that holds a hemp license, if they have a drug-related felony in the past 10 years. It imposes penalties if you're found to be a habitual hot crop grower. But many states, after the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, they didn't even wait on the USDA to start their rules. They created their own individual hemp programs. And so, as I mentioned, that's why I went back to the 2014 Farm Bill. They did their own rules under which they were allowed to do under the 2014 rules, so that they would not have to adhere to the 2018 rules yet. And so 17 states now are going to operate under the 2014 Farm Bill for as long as they can, which for now is until Halloween of this year. And there's talk of federal legislation to extend that, but we can't count on that. We're not sure what's going to happen. It's also legally significant that hemp can now be placed in the mail with certain paperwork that the U.S. Postal Service has put out, and that hemp can now cross state lines without interference. As we all know, there has been a lot of interference, up until a year ago. Hemp was considered marijuana. It looks and smells the same. So we're going to continue to encounter problems with that. But you're not going to be prosecuted and put in jail. It's proven that that's. There's been a lot of pushback on some of the rules that the USDA came up with. One of the most significant ones is the 15-day sampling window, which poses a couple of problems from what I understand. It's when the plant reaches the THC level of a plant goes up and down over the life cycle of the plant, and it's at near its highest 2 weeks before. Also, the requirement of a DEA certified or registered lab is problematic. Whether a lab needs that certification or not, just the existence of labs, period, capable of taking in that volume of sampling in such a narrow window is problematic. The farmer cannot move his harvest off of his property until he's gotten a test sample back, confirming that his crop is compliant and that it's not over 0.3%. It's also problematic under the total THC testing standard, which makes it harder to meet that 0.3% threshold. Texas has given itself a little bit more variability on that, as long as 0.3 is within your measure of uncertainty, which is what a lab will give you, such as these test results are within a 0.03% or 0.05% measure of variability as to their accuracy. As long as 0.3 falls into that under Texas law, you're okay. The other major flaw of the USDA rules is its requirement disposal of a hot crop by a DEA distributor. And what they do is they render controlled substances unusable by a person. And that results in a total loss farmer if he's not able to remediate his crop by sending it to a processor to remove the excess THC from it, or recycle it or reuse it in other ways for industrial purposes, so that he can at least monetize the crop in some form. So the USDA spokesman has said we use the word disposal instead of destruction on purpose, acknowledging that that's something that we would have to work on. And Texas is aware of this as well, and Texas doesn't want to see its farmers suffer. So these are things that we're working on at the council too, to try to address and change as much as we can, but our hands are a little bit tied by the requirements of the 2018 Farm Bill and then the USDA regulations until they change. So in Texas, the regulatory oversight of hemp is divided in agencies for 2 phases. So the Department of it regulates licensing and planting through harvest and disposal. So it sets rules and controls it for things like fees, inspection, sampling, your pre-harvest testing, enforcement, transportation, seed certification. Right now, it's just approval and academic research. They just adopted their rules as final on March 6th, 2020. It's in the Texas Register. They've also got a lot of good information on their website. The Texas Department of State Health Services, DSHS, is in charge of regulating the processing, testing, and all of the regulation toward the end consumable hemp product that you find on the shelves. And they're going to be the ones also charged with doing the random sampling and inspection of those products to make sure that they meet the regulations. They have not yet put out their proposed rules yet. I'll get to what they've done so far later. But the House Bill 1325, the hemp statute, says that local counties and municipalities are not supposed to interfere with the hemp program, which is a pretty big deal. This is from the Texas Department of Agriculture's website. It set forth all the dominoes that had to fall in order for us to enact a hemp program. They've all fallen now. The USDA has approved Texas's plan. The rules were taken on Monday, and I know that they got 100. The Texas program, it creates a new Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 24, and the licensing and fees, it's going to be $100 for a hemp license, which is kind of like your umbrella for your whole property that you own, which doesn't necessarily have to be contiguous, and that gives you the authority to grow hemp. The agency has given itself a 60-day turnaround time to approve your license. They don't intend on taking that long, but that's the cushion that they give themselves given the limited funds and personnel that they have. Then once your hemp license is approved, you'll be prompted to purchase lot permits. So you need a different lot permit for each variety that you grow. And you might consider breaking your lots down into smaller lots if you can afford the additional lot permit fees and sampling and testing costs that are going to go along with that. Because if your sample, you're only allowed one sample and one shot at it, if that comes back hot, you then have to destroy the entire lot. So a little strategy you're going to have a facility participation fee that changes to your facilities after your initial hemp license application. You'll have to pay a $500 change fee. Some of the fees are not determined yet. The processors are going to register with a TDA, but their license is actually going to be issued and they're going to be regulated by dishes. The sampling and collection fee is $300. The TDA was not given any funding or personnel to run this program, so they have to, some of these fees are statutorily mandated and capped, and they've got to come up with ways to fund the program and regulate it through the fees as well. So the growing license application, you have to have a license grow, handle, or sell hemp all along the way. The application is online. You have to watch a little video, 25 minutes. It requires all the personal information on your key participants so they can run a federal background check, and they need the GPS coordinates for where your hemp is going to be grown and stored. The license is valid for a year. If you don't complete the application fully or something you gets kicked back for some reason, you can either reapply or you can appeal the denial. I think it might be quicker just to figure out what you did wrong and reapply. Another thing that I recently found out is that you're responsible for that hemp field for 3 years. So if hemp continues to grow after you abandon operations, you're still on the hook for that, kind of like environmental law. A few new things came out with the adopted rules. The commissioner at first was opposed to allowing live plants or clones. Now those will be allowed in with a valid transport manifest, a phytosanitary certificate, and any other paperwork you can show showing that it's a legal plant from a legal licensed hemp producer. Transplanting is allowed between lots owned under the same license, but if your business is to transplant and then sell it to someone else to grow, another hemp license holder, it has to be, that's going to be considered a harvest. You're going to have to go through the whole sampling and testing that's required as if you were to grow the plant out fully. A little tidbit is that for now, seedlings before the THC is expressed aren't being regulated at all. They're just being treated as ordinary. You do need to sell them to somebody who holds a hemp license after May 1st, but so far they're not being regulated. That could change in the future if it becomes a problem. There's a lot of record keeping and reporting requirements. You've got to, get organized, figure out how you're going to keep these records for 3 years on where your seeds came from, your production, your handling, harvest records, disposal records, transport records. You're going to have to send a lot report to the TA within phase of sampling. The labs will results to the TDA, to the license holder, also get notified. Seeds are going to have to comply with Texas seed law applicable to all seeds, and you're going to have to identify where they came from. They're going to have to be labeled with their origin and their jurisdiction, just like any other seeds. Reporting also has to be made to the USDA, but the TDA will do that for you. Now on to the dishes portion of the regulation of the program. They have a lot of definitions. They put out some informal rules in the fall. They're not the official proposed rules that go in the Texas Register, but they were just kind of, this is what we're thinking. They're trying to front load their public comment process, so they already know what they're working with when they submit their proposed rules to the parent agency, Health and Human Services Commission, with a greater chance that they can roll those through and get those adopted once they're ready. As I mentioned, CBD is not currently considered a food adulterant. That could change. Some other definitions are of a hemp processor. So it's anyone who processes raw agricultural hemp into a consumable form. You've got to have a license for that. If you're making other products too, you might need a food manufacturer permit, but not if you're only engaged in hemp activity. There's definitions for lot numbers, measurement of uncertainty. The word batch is referred to throughout the rules, but it's not defined, so they're going to have to come up with a definition for that. And of course, there is a definition of the of smoking, which seems to be, they're trying to be pretty comprehensive and saying that it is the burning or igniting substance and inhaling of the smoke, or heating and inhaling of the substance and resulting vapor aerosols. You can imagine that's been a very controversial rule. Dishes has been under a lot of personal attack for that, but understand that they are charged by House Bill 1325 in the statute. That was a promise made on the Senate floor that hemp would not be smoked in Texas because it's viewed as the camel's nose under the tent for marijuana. That's the reason for that. So Dishes isn't out to try to make this draconian rule. They're forced to come up with something to effectuate the intent expressed in the statute, which says that you cannot manufacture hemp for smoking. And the informal Dishes rules came out with an outright ban on the retail sale of smokable hemp. But then that conflicted with another portion of the rules that allowed the sale of hemp products in compliance with another state's hemp program, and other states obviously allow it. So they're facing an enforcement and a litigation nightmare there. Again, they have to come up with something because it's in the statute. But we've discussed on other occasions why it's unconstitutional and problematic, but that's what we've got to work with until 2021. So Dishes can conduct inspections of your premises, of the store, even your vehicle, if you're a distributor, a manufacturer, or whatever, to inspect and collect samples. And they're going to have application requirements that are similar to TDA. They require currently under their informal rules fingerprints and additional written consent of the owner's premises. Their licenses will also be good for a year. The processor license is currently being contemplated at $250 a year, with a 45-day period to review that. The labs are supposed to be ISO or a comparable certification. And as mentioned, the USDA has relaxed the requirement for DEA certification until Halloween of 2021. Their informal rules contained rules about what the THC concentration can be, the quantity of heavy metals and pesticides, the presence of harmful pathogenic microorganisms, and the presence of solvents and other substances posing a health risk. As far as retailers, each retail location is going to have to pay $150, valid for a year. There's going to be label requirements for the products. These are things that we would expect to see and that we see in products in mature markets in Colorado, where we have a batch ID, a number, and product date, a QR code with a link to the COA, manufacturer, and then that FDA disclosure statement that these statements have not been evaluated by the FDA for the treatment or cure of any conditions or diseases. So retailers will, though, be allowed to cure a negligent violation. They won't be given much time, but they will be given a chance before the hammer falls on them. They are going to be subject to this random sampling. But again, these are just informal rules that have been put out by dishes. The proposed rules aren't out yet. The adopted rules aren't out yet. They're not really even expected until early June. So until then, you can sell whatever hemp products that are legal in another state here in Texas. That's all I've got for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate you going into such detail because I know that it is. Oh, hold on. There's a little bit of a feedback. If you can, there we go. Perfect. Sweet. Thank you. So yes, there's a lot of content having to do with hemp right now. I believe that one of our people was asking about where's the application for hemp, and you can go to the TDA's website and go to the hemp tab, and they have the video that Lisa was speaking about that you have to watch before you fill it out. It's not a super long application, but there are some pretty specific details. If you go to our website, we did link to both where the application can be found, and we also linked to a video that Commissioner Sid Miller made a few days ago, kind of going over what to expect. So on that note, I'm going to transition over to my slides now. I am Jax Finkel. If you didn't catch that when I was talking earlier, I am going to be talking about next steps here in Texas and what we can expect. So let me get this for you guys. One second. All right, so it should be presenting. So in Texas, you know, Shawn talked a lot about what is going on at the federal level, and there's a lot of ballot initiatives. In Texas, we actually don't have access to ballot initiative as in the traditional sense of what you would imagine. So in a lot of states, you get to collect signatures, and then you take and present those signatures, and your item can be added to the ballot to be voted on. In Texas, back in 1997, they changed the law to where drug statutes have to be changed through the state legislature. And our legislature meets every 2 years in the odd number years. Their sessions are for 140 days, as long as there's no special session that's called. You can see on the screen here, hopefully, can everybody see the legislative process slide? No, that's not presenting. It's presenting on my end. Let's see. So that's not showing Les. Is my screen being shared properly?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, Les is helping me because I don't know what I'm doing. So thanks, Les. I'm not touching Les. We are socially distanced by a minimum of 6 inches. Hopefully that is working. Oh, I can see on Lisa's screen that it's working. You guys, it's kind of a funny setup. We've got like my desk and all of us strategically placed with like hand sanitizer and Clorox wipes in the middle. So we're taking this all very serious. But so now you can see this process, right? And it looks kind of like a board game. And the way that I'm going to walk us through this is kind of how a lot of legislation moves. You've got the House of Representatives, which has 150 legislators, and they tend to do a lot of the massive vetting of bills. You tend to have longer hearings with more public comment on that side. And then typically we see the bills moving over to the Senate, where there are smaller hearings, but they're more on the nuances of the bills, getting that hammered out. And then ultimately going to the governor. So starting here, hopefully you can see my cursor. Your legislators introduce legislation. They can pre-file it. They can wait until the session is started, but they introduce that legislation. And then it's up to the Speaker of the House to assign chairs to the different committees. So the bills that are, or the committees that our bills are often in front of are like Public Health Committee, jurisprudence, those types of committees. So once those chairs are assigned to those committees, bills will start coming to them and being assigned to their committee. Now then, let me preface this by, if at any point your bill doesn't move to the next step, it's dead in this process, generally speaking. Now, we have seen some bills be killed, brought back to life, killed again like a dozen times in a session. So that is not unheard of, but in general, that doesn't happen. So let's say that your chair now has the bill. He can assign it for a committee hearing. If he doesn't assign it for a committee hearing, it's automatically dead because it's not going to progress. They usually have to give about 5 business days notice for a hearing, unless it's later in the session, and then that is reduced to 72 hours. The hearings, you usually have about 3 minutes to give comment. There's often patients, doctors, other professionals, depending on the topic, having testimony and then public testimony. A misconception that a lot of people think happens is that on the hearing day that they will actually vote that day. They do not. They actually usually vote the following week or 2 on a slate of bills. So all of the bills that they heard the following week, they will vote on. So once you've got that vote and your bill is moved out of committee, it goes to something called the Calendars Committee. There's a Calendars Committee in the House and the Senate, and they act as the gatekeepers to the floor of each chamber. And it is of note that along the way, all of the votes are recorded votes except for in the Calendars Committee, where it's a simple up or down vote. You don't know how the different members voted on the bill, but you simply know if your bill is going to be set for the agenda or not. So assuming that they are good with the bill and no one's tagged it, it will be assigned for a date to be heard on the House floor. Now, just to be really clear, you might be set for a certain date, but it is likely not to actually be heard on that day. As many things are, there can be a backlog of bills that have to be addressed first. Things can be moved and taken out of order, but ultimately the bill will be read on the floor, debated, amendments can be made if necessary, and then there will be a vote from the legislators, and that is a recorded vote. Once that passes out of the House, it comes over to the Senate. Now in the Senate, the lieutenant governor is the one that governs that chamber, and he decides which bills are sent to which committee. So if he assigns your bill to a committee, it stays alive. If he doesn't, it dies. And it basically moves in a very similar fashion in the House, except for the hearings are a little bit smaller. You'll have your hearing. There's a different way to register for those hearings instead of electronic, just to let you know. And then they'll have the hearing and they'll vote on it at a later date. It will go to calendars in the Senate. Assuming that they decide to pass it forward, it will go to the Senate floor. They have debate on the Senate floor, but quite often once a bill has made to the Senate floor, they kind of know what they're going to do with it because they've vetted it out through a lot of different processes along the way. And so it's more getting their arguments and their positions on record. And then they'll have a vote, and assuming that it passes out of that chamber, it will head to the governor. And the governor has 3 options for how he can treat a law. He can choose to sign it and hold a signing ceremony like he did for the Texas Compassionate Use Program. Or he can ignore it into law, where it just simply will go into effect on the date that is statutorily written or he can choose to veto the bill. Now, there is a way to override a veto, but vetoes are normally held until the end of the session, and so it's harder to go through that process. I do want to note that this is how a typical bill makes it through the legislature. There are things called joint resolutions, and joint resolutions actually edit our Constitution in Texas. And they move through the legislative process much like a bill, but with higher barriers of passage. They have to achieve supermajorities in both chamber and be signed by the governor, at which point those joint resolutions will be added to the following November's ballot. They will be voted on. Then that policy will come back to the legislature, who will create statutes surrounding that, and then they will go to the different regulatory agencies for regulation. It can be a multi-year, multi-million-dollar process. It is possible to do it that way, but it is a very high barrier, as I mentioned. So talk about where are we right now in the cycle. So we have a 2-year cycle in Texas. We just finished the primary elections. I'm sure if you were following, you can see that there's a lot of candidate runoff elections across the state in both the Democratic and Republican parties. There's also libertarian candidates, but they use a different convention cycle than the Democrats and the Republicans. I want to preface this slide by saying that this may all be very subject to change due to the coronavirus situation. I understand that the Republicans and the Democrats are trying to see if they can postpone when their conventions are, or will they be able to hold them virtually? You know, what does that look like? You know, for example, everybody's wanting to use features like Zoom now, right? And so and see sometimes these platforms are overloaded. So I know that there's a lot of conversation to decide what is the right avenue to go through. We may even see some impacts on how the elections are going to be held. But as of right now, candidate runoff elections will be May 26th. And then moving into October, if you are not already registered to vote, you'll have to be registered to vote to participate in early voting from October 19th to the 23rd, and then general elections on November 3rd. It's of note that only 6 days later, these newly elected legislators can start pre-filing bills, so we'll have to step into legislative mode quite quickly. So our next steps here on the political cycle are going to be getting out the vote and staying updated on the changing situations surrounding the elections. I also wanted to note that there's a voter guide available at texasnormal.org/votersguide. And you can find out how your legislators stand. We're hoping to have it updated in time for the runoff elections so that if you're in those districts, you can compare how those candidates stand on the issue. So after the legislative session happens, there is something called interim charges. So the committees that are developed during the legislative session actually also do work not during the session. They hold what's known as an interim charge. And basically, this is a rulemaking oversight, engagement type of situation where people come and give public comment and invited comment on specific topics. So we have had interim charges released in both the House and the Senate, and there will be rulemaking and implementation oversight for both the Texas Hemp program and the Texas Compassionate Use program. We haven't talked a lot about the Texas Compassionate Use program. It was expanded slightly in the last legislative session, and they have also now defined intractable neurodegenerative disorder, and it's quite an extensive list of conditions that are included now. They are also going to be monitoring and making recommendations regarding the vaping crisis and tobacco-related products. However, it is of note that the Texas legislature recently has put a hold to all committee hearings just because of the coronavirus. They want to ensure participation in these interim charges because these are essentially studies on different topics. So we're going to be tuned in and staying updated to when these are rescheduled. I'm not sure how long they may be pushed out, but as we know, we will keep y'all updated as well. So make sure you stay tuned for that. We heard from Lisa talking a lot about the upcoming processes on licensing for manufacturing and licensing for retail. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for regulatory advocacy. You know, you get the statutes, you get the law that comes out from the legislative session, but then you have these regulatory bodies that create, you know, all of the meat to it. So you have the skeleton from the legislature, and the regulators fill in all of the meat and skin and organs and all that good stuff. We got real anatomical there. But this is another really important time for us to engage, because we need to be able to push back on, for example, the ban that they're trying to institute for selling smokable and vapable hemp products. We need to also prepare for the 2021 legislative session to look for a statutory fix for the ban on the manufacture of smokable and vapable hemp products in Texas. I think also another thing that we're going to need to really start thinking about moving forward are things maybe we're not necessarily used to talking about, such as you know, DUI per se limits, talking about drug testing for state employees, for teachers. You know, it's becoming very complicated since certain percentage of THC is legal and a certain percentage is not. So I anticipate that there will be lots of conversations surrounding this. It's going to be really important that you guys stay tuned in to different drafts of legislation that's going to be coming up. So I don't want to talk too terribly long about this. It looks like we had a little Q&A going on the side regarding some teacup information, applications. Looks like we've got those answered there. Oh wait, is there one open question? That looks like a statement, not a question. I'm going to check on the YouTube real quick and see if I see any questions there. Oh, you nominate me for Lieutenant Governor? Thank you. I do not accept the nomination at this time, but I maintain interest. But if anybody has any questions, pop them up real quick. I want to give a couple minutes. I see some people that had actually never heard of the endocannabinoid system before Amanda mentioned it. So that's awesome that you are spreading that, Amanda. Also, some people have been asking for information about Operation Trapped. We've shared that link with you guys as well. I think that we may have covered everything very well and all the questions are answered. So on that note, I think we're just going to end it a little bit early. I want to say thank you for Coates and Rose and Vicente Sederberg for sponsoring this, and for also lending your very knowledgeable lawyers to come and chat with us. I want to thank Amanda and Robert for participating and talking about medical cannabis, and all of you guys who dialed in or watched the live stream. I'm very happy that we were able to make this happen. I'm sure there were probably a few bumps in the experience, but as we see this bandwidth to virtual kind of having to scale, hopefully that will be even better for next time. Amanda did mention that there is going to be a webinar tomorrow. It's an interactive webinar hosted by Foundation for an Informed Texas with Dr. Ethan Russo and Dr. Sue Sicily. Tickets still are available for those on informedtexas.org underneath the events tab. Those will be available until tomorrow morning. And it will be an interactive webinar, kind of like we've done here, but it will be private. So it will only be for ticketed participants. So on that note, I did want to close and say special thank you to Flamingo Cantina. I know that we are very clearly not there today, but we are in spirit, and I know that they've had to close down, but I did see that they are going to be doing a live stream tonight of the Mau Mau Chaplains. So if you guys have the opportunity and you're looking for some good Irie reggae vibes, please make sure that you tune in. I know it's going to be interesting to see really how many things could have been an email instead of a meeting. But I am really thankful to be able to spend time with you guys today. So everybody take care of your immune system, wash your hands, stay tuned with what's going on with the upcoming elections. And I just want to say thank you so much to everybody. So on that note, we're gonna close it out here, and we will check in with you guys shortly with other virtual meetings and webinars for you. So thank you, Texas. Been wonderful.